Hi everybody, welcome to Movies by McManus, the channel where we review movies, comics, TV, books, whatever type of media you're into, in the context of who created it and what effect it has on the world. I'm your host, Greg. Let's get started. This week, we're going to be reviewing Sorry to Bother You, the 2018 film directed by Boots Riley. So let's start with a quick synopsis of Sorry to Bother You. Our protagonist is Cassius Green, and that name is very fitting because this movie is all about money. Cassius is a telemarketer, and he only works on commission, so he struggles a lot. He's behind on pretty much all of his payments. And throughout the movie, he sees advertisements for this corporation called Worry Free. And what Worry Free is basically people can sign up for a lifetime contract where they're given free room and board and free food in exchange for what amounts to basically human slavery. So at Cassius's telemarketing job, he realized that he can sell more product if he puts on what's called a white voice. Basically, he makes the person on the other end of the phone believe that he is white instead of black. And he realizes he can sell more like this and becomes one of the top telemarketers at the firm he works for. Eventually, his co-workers start to unionize and go on strike. And at first, Cassius is with them. But when his manager decides it's time for him to get a promotion, he sells out his fellow co-workers and goes for the money. All of his needs are pretty much met. He has a nice new apartment. He has all the things that he always wanted but couldn't afford. But his friends abandon him, his activist girlfriend leaves him, and he finds out that his new job is actually selling the worry-free slave labor that he thought was so disgusting in the past. Eventually, and this is when the movie kind of gets off the rails a bit, he finds out that the company Worry Free is turning people into human-horse hybrids in order to basically create cheaper labor. They try to coerce Cassius into becoming one of these human-horse hybrids. He gets understandably freaked out. He quits his job, goes back to his friends on the union, and tries to expose the company. But while his union workers, they get what they want, their demands are met, there's no justice for the CEOs of Worry Free. They pretty much get away scot-free, and their stock actually increases. To make things worse, Cassius finds out that he's actually been given the drug secretly and is becoming a human horse person against his will. In the final scene, Cassius, along with the human horse people, crash into the CEO's mansion, presumably to kill him. And that's how the movie ends. So, to understand this movie, you have to look at who created it. See, Boots Riley isn't an experienced filmmaker. He's a rapper and a political activist. And before he was a rapper, he worked as a telemarketer. And that's when he discovered that by tricking the other person on the phone to thinking that he was white, he's able to sell more product. So you're already seeing his personal life bleeding into the movie. But what I really want to talk about is his political activism. Boots Riley was one of the founding members in 2011 of Occupy Oakland, which was an offshoot of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And Occupy Wall Street, a lot of what they were protesting against was corporate greed. And then he goes and makes a movie about corporate greed. So let's look at how a movie made by a political activist is different than a movie made by an experienced filmmaker. One of the points I want to make is Boots Riley's use of surrealism and absurdity. You see, as Cassius goes more and more up the corporate ladder, things get more and more ridiculous. Perhaps Boots is trying to say that as you take a deeper look into capitalism, things get more and more ridiculous. Things don't make as much sense. But it might even be more than that. You see, if you show absurdity in a film, you're actually saying more about real life than if you were to show it straightforward, because you're showing how people actually feel about something rather than how it actually is. For example, one of the most popular TV shows that all the characters watch in the movie is something called I Got the Shit Beat Out of Me, where basically contestants go on and someone beats them up for cash money. Now, a show like this obviously could never exist, but it does kind of show our feeling towards reality TV and prank shows in general, where people will go on and embarrass themselves for money and sometimes fame. Now, to get more towards the actual story, looking at the absurdity of a company like Worry Free, where people will sign up for what amounts to human slavery, actually says a lot about how workers feel in this country right now. So many of us are working jobs that we feel like we can't escape from, that really only cover our basic needs. So when he shows a legit slave cult, it's not that far different than how we feel about our actual jobs. Now, let's look at the most ridiculous part of the movie, the human-horse hybrids, where a company is literally mutating people so that they can work harder for them. It gets at the feeling of many workers that they're just beasts of burden, that they're expected to give 100% and destroy their own body even for a company that only cares about profit. At one of my favorite lines in the movie, when Cassius discovers the human-horse hybrids are being created, he says, "What, so you're making human-horse people to turn a profit?" And the CEO looks at him and says, "Yeah, basically, I just didn't want you to think I was crazy." This line kind of shows the capitalist motto to a T, where the second money is involved, the second profit is at risk, all morality can and should go out the window. Now, let's go back to Boots Riley's activism for a second. Something that's very present in the film is the idea of fake activism, or performative activism, as you might have heard recently. Basically, the idea of performative activism is having the aesthetic of activism without actually trying to make any change. And this is most present in Cassius's girlfriend Detroit's art gallery. Now, in this scene, the character Detroit, played by Tessa Thompson, is showing off her art for a lot of rich clients. Now, through her art, she's trying to bring attention to the struggles in Africa. But her rich clients, while on surface level seem to care, it's clear that they don't actually want to make any change. And in one of her performances, they even ridicule her and throw things at her to the point of physical pain, showing that this is really all just a game for them. And in that scene, it's interesting to note that Detroit actually puts on a fake British accent, very similar to the white voice that Cassius used to sell his product. Another example of performative activism that's shown in the movie and is almost as a running joke is a certain activist character called the Coke and a Smile Girl. At one of the strikes, when Cassius is trying to walk in the door, an activist who does not work at the call center throws a Coke at him and yells, "Have a Coke and a smile." This character ends up getting a sponsorship by Coca-Cola and leaves the strike to then shoot commercials for them. This idea of activism for your own self-interest rather than actually trying to save the world is probably something that Boots Riley experienced through his years of activism, and it's interesting that he wanted to put that in his movie. So, what changes does Boots Riley want this movie to make on the world? Well, we can see that this movie is definitely an extension of his activism. So, how does he suggest we escape our jobs and capitalism as a whole? Well, the movie has some suggestions. Now, you could follow the Cassius Green route and just keep your head down, do what the bosses tell you, and maybe you'll get promoted. But Boots Riley seems to have issues with this. For one, it seems to just be keeping the worker down. The promise of a promotion that will never happen keeps you in a job you're unhappy with that doesn't pay you what you're worth. And even if you do get that promotion, the corporation will just find new ways to exploit you. In fact, it seems that the only people who don't get exploited are the people at the top. And the movie makes it very clear that you have to be born into that position. In one of the most embarrassing scenes in the movie, the CEO of Worry Free makes Cassius rap in front of him and his fellow partygoers. Now, there's clearly racial implications here, but it also shows that even though Cassius has risen up the corporate ladder, to the CEO and his rich friends, he will always be viewed as the other. So if the Cassius approach doesn't work, then what will? Well, the movie is clearly pro-union, and unions in real life have been shown to help their workers. So perhaps Boots is trying to say that if workers stick together, it'll be harder for the CEOs to exploit them. So there is a third option that I normally wouldn't even bring up, but it is how the movie ends, and that's violent revolution. Even though the union and the strike works and the workers get paid more, they're still at the same job, and the CEOs are still on top. In fact, they're making more money than ever. And for the human slaves at Worry Free, nothing has changed. It's not until Cassius breaks into the CEO's mansion and murders him that he ever gets any comeuppance. So maybe Boots is trying to say that those on top will always be on top unless we force them to come down. After all, Boots Riley is a rapper, and his first album was titled Kill Your Landlord. And he also has songs such as 5 Million Ways to Kill a CEO and The Guillotine. So this is not a man who's above threatening rich people. But it's important to remember that this is a surrealist comedy. He doesn't actually mean human horse people, and he probably doesn't mean find your boss and murder him. Instead, he means take to the streets. When a CEO does something wrong, demand justice. After all, that is the conclusion that a founding member of Occupy Oakland would come to. So, what do you think about Boots Riley and Sorry to Bother You? Leave your opinion in the comments below. And if you like this video, subscribe to our channel. Also, check out our podcast and follow us on social media at Movies by McManus. I'm your host, Greg. You have a good night.